The gunshot that ended Tyshida Williams' life was likely close range, likely aimed at her head or torso, the act of someone intending to kill, not wound. The first police report was a masterpiece of misdirection, filed in the clinical language of law enforcement. It described a death investigation at a Southwest D.C. apartment on July 30th, 2023. The victim, Tyshida Williams, 31. The preliminary classification, suicide. It was a neat, tragic box. But the detectives who walked into that apartment on South Capitol Street weren't just seeing a scene. They were reading a story someone had hastily written, and the opening chapter felt off. The atmosphere was wrong. The silence was the kind that follows a performance, not a final, solitary act. This is the story of when love turns deadly. But from the very first moment, the question was not about tragedy, it was about theater, suicide, or a murder dressed in its clothes. The suicide narrative is a specific, fragile script. It requires a logical, solitary sequence. The individual, the weapon, the motive of despair, all contained within a single person's actions. But crime scenes are loud with details. The position of Tyshida's body relative to the recovered firearm, did it make biomechanical sense? Was there disturbed furniture suggesting a struggle rather than a resigned stillness? What was the state of the apartment? Were personal items flown, or was everything eerily orderly? The initial responding officers, while not homicide experts, have a baseline for self-inflicted gunshot wounds. Something here likely pinged their radar. A hesitation. A glance exchanged. The call went out not just for a body removal, but for the Metropolitan Police Department's homicide branch to take a look. This request is the first crack in the killer's facade. Homicide detectives are archaeologists of violence. They don't accept the story on the surface. They dig for the story underneath. Their arrival shifted the energy from processing a death to dissecting a potential crime. They began looking for the contradictions. If this was a suicide, where was the note? Not always present, but often a piece of the puzzle. More crucially, they looked for the forensics that don't lie. The body itself would soon be on its way to the office of the chief medical examiner, where a pathologist would perform the ultimate audit of the story they'd been told. But who told them that story? Almost certainly, it was a person present at the scene. A person with a vested interest in the suicide narrative. That person was 35-year-old Pernell Sims, Tyshida Williams' former romantic partner. His role in those first moments is critical. Was he the one who made the 911 call? What exact words did he use? Did he say, "My ex-girlfriend has shot herself"? Or the more passive, "I found her like this"? His initial statement would become the foundation of his lie and the first piece of evidence against him. When it crumbled, the attempt to stage the scene was a gamble. But the killer made a fatal error in his staging. He forgot one universal rule of violent death. Blood speaks its own truth. What did the blood spatter pattern in that apartment reveal that made it impossible for Tyshida Williams to have been alone? To understand the fury of the finale, we must reconstruct the relationship that led to that apartment. Who was Tyshida Nisha Mother Williams beyond the crime scene photos? A 31-year-old woman from Southeast D.C., a daughter, a friend, a person navigating the complexities of life in the city. Her world was likely a mosaic of work, family obligations, personal aspirations, and social connections. Her relationship with Pernell Sims, as defined by the cold term prior romantic partner in court documents, existed within this world. But that phrase is a legal placeholder for what was almost certainly a complex, emotionally charged human connection that had turned toxic. The dynamic of a prior relationship is a dangerous frontier in domestic violence. It represents a shift from shared life to separation, but often not a clean one. For the partner prone to possession and control traits, frequently at the heart of intimate partner homicide, end of the romance is not an end to ownership. It's a rebellion that must be quashed. Every interaction after the breakup is a negotiation of power. A text message ignored, a new friend mentioned, a refusal to share a password, all are perceived not as personal boundaries, but as acts of defiance. Tyshida's very existence as an autonomous individual after their romance became a daily provocation to Sims. This sets the stage for the fatal catalyst, the argument over Tyshida's phone. In the modern context, a smartphone is not just a device. It's a portal to one's entire independent life. It holds conversations with new friends or potential partners, financial independence, location data, and personal memories. For an ex-partner simmering with jealousy and a need for control, demanding access to a phone is the ultimate test. It's a demand for total transparency, a symbolic erasure of privacy and autonomy. When Tyshida refused, and the evidence suggests she did, her refusal was catastrophic. It wasn't about the phone. It was the final, unambiguous declaration that she was no longer under his jurisdiction. In that moment, the phone became a symbol of her freedom, and to Sims, that freedom was an intolerable theft. A fight exploded from private to public, moving from the apartment to the building's lobby and garage. Witnesses saw fragments of this drama, but this public display raises a sinister question. Was the fight taken outside because it was uncontrollable? Or was it a deliberate tactic, a form of public humiliation and intimidation, meant to break her down before the final private act back inside? The migration of the argument from the apartment into the semi-public spaces of the building's lobby and parking garage is a critical, telling escalation. This wasn't a private spat leaking out. It was a conflict boiling over its container. It speaks to a loss of control, or perhaps a performative rage meant to intimidate. Witnesses, neighbors coming or going, people in adjacent cars became an unintended audience to a relationship's violent decay. Let's reconstruct this chilling scene. In the lobby, perhaps near the mailboxes or the elevator bank, voices rise from a hiss to a shout. The argument is no longer just about a phone. It's about respect, loyalty, accusations. It's about the past. Sims's anger, fueled by entitlement and rejection, seeks a stage. He may have been attempting to corner her, to shame her, to force compliance through public exposure. Tyshida, in turn, may have been trying to reach a public space precisely for safety, believing he wouldn't escalate in front of witnesses. It's a terrifying calculus. Then, the movement to the parking garage. This shift is even more ominous. Garages are liminal spaces technically public, but often desolate, echoing, and poorly monitored. The lighting is harsh. The corners are dark. The argument here takes on a more physically threatening dimension. Was he blocking her from getting into a car? Was he following her as she tried to walk away? This environment provides more opportunity for physical intimidation, grabbing, pushing, looming over her short of a final fatal blow. Every second in that garage raises the stakes and the danger, and then the pivotal, almost incomprehensible decision. They go back inside the apartment. This is the point where the narrative tightens into a noose. Why return to the private arena? The possibilities are a menu of horrors. Perhaps Tyshida, emotionally drained and hoping to finally end the confrontation for good, went back for her keys, her wallet, something essential to her escape, thinking she could grab it and leave. Perhaps Sims, his rage still unspent, used coercion, a threat, a physical grip, a promise to just talk to maneuver her back into the isolated space. Or perhaps, in a final, tragic misjudgment, she believed that back in the apartment, away from prying eyes, they could actually talk it out. That the man she once cared for would re-emerge once the public spectacle was over. Whatever the reason, crossing that threshold back into the apartment was the last choice she would ever make. The door closed. The public world was sealed out. The witnesses were gone. Now, there was only the two of them, the history of their relationship, the fresh fury of the argument, and whatever weapon was within reach. The door closes. The outside world is gone. In the silence that follows the shouting, what happens next? Does the argument reignite instantly? Or is there a terrible, calm moment where the decision is made? And where was the gun during all of this? Was it in the apartment already? Or did it appear at this precise, private moment? The closing of the apartment door marked the beginning of the end. Inside that private space, the dynamic shifted irrevocably. The public checks on Sims's behavior were gone. What followed was the culmination of the rage that had been building over the phone, in the lobby, in the garage. The argument likely reached its zenith, a torrent of accusation and venom. And then, the introduction of the firearm. Where did the gun come from? This is a key detail. Was it Sims's weapon, already in the apartment? If so, its presence indicates premeditation, or at least a mindset where lethal violence was a conceivable option. Was it legally owned? The plea deal of murder while armed confirms its use, but its origins matter. A firearm transforms a heated argument into a lethal confrontation in an instant. Its mere presence in his hand is an act of ultimate intimidation. A silent scream that changes everything. The fatal moment was not an accident. Second-degree murder, the charge Sims pled guilty to, involves a killing committed with malice aforethought. A conscious disregard for human life that arises in the moment, not a pre-planned scheme. This fits the classic pattern. Blinding rage, a readily available weapon, a catastrophic decision made in a matter of seconds. He pulled the trigger. The gunshot that ended Tyshida Williams' life was likely close range, likely aimed at her head or torso, the act of someone intending to kill, not wound. Then the performance began in the ringing silence after the shot. Sims's mind switched from passion to calculation. He had a body. He had a gun. He had a story to build. Staging a suicide scene requires both cold nerve and specific knowledge. He would have needed to position Tyshida's body and the weapon in a way that mimicked a self-inflicted wound. This is where he made his critical amateur mistakes. Mistake 1, gunshot residue, GSR. When a gun is fired, it expels microscopic particles of burnt and unburnt gunpowder, along with primer chemicals, onto the shooter's hand, sleeve, and the immediate environment. In a suicide, the victim's dominant hand is typically coated. If Sims wiped the gun and placed it in her hand, or even fired it himself wearing gloves, the absence of GSR on Tyshida's hands would be a glaring red flag. Did he even think to fire a second wasteful shot into a pillow to get residue on her hand? Almost certainly not. Mistake 2, blood spatter. This is the language of violence. High-velocity impact spatter from a gunshot creates a fine, mist-like pattern radiating from the wound. Its shape, density, and direction are a map. If Sims moved the body after the shooting, he would have created secondary transfer stains and drips that conflicted with the primary spatter pattern. The spatter on his clothing, if he was close, would tell its own story. Did he change his clothes? Did he miss a droplet on his shoe? Mistake 3, the trajectory. This is often the lie breaker. Medical examiners are forensic geometers. By examining the wound path, the entry point, the angle through the body, the exit wound, they can reconstruct the position of the victim and the shooter. A trajectory that is physically impossible for Tyshida to have inflicted upon herself an awkward angle, a shot from behind. A distance too great for her arm length is incontrovertible proof of a second person. One of these 3 forensic pillars, the missing GSR, the contradictory blood story, or the impossible bullet path, was the first to collapse under the medical examiner's scrutiny. But which one was so blatantly wrong that it turned a suicide investigation into a homicide case within days? The medical examiner's official ruling of homicide was the detonator. It formally declared the staged scene a fraud and launched a focused murder investigation. For Detective William Hightower and the MPD Homicide Unit, the case was now a puzzle with a known liar at its center, Pernell Sims. Their work shifted from what happened to prove he did it. The forensic report was their roadmap. The absent GSR on Tyshida's hands, the blood spatter telling a story of movement after the shot, or the definitive, geometrically impossible trajectory, whichever it was gave them the how. Now they needed to cement the who. This is where the witnesses from the lobby and garage became crucial. Cops re-interviewed them, no longer asking about a despondent woman, but about a violent argument. Their accounts painted a damning prelude. Sims was not grieving. He was furious. He was the aggressor in a very public, escalating confrontation. This testimony established motive, rage, jealousy, control, and intent, escalating violence, immediately prior to the death. Digital evidence was likely scoured. Phone records would show a flurry of calls or texts between them that morning. Location pings could confirm they were together. Perhaps there were previous texts from Sims showing possessive or threatening language, building a pattern. The history of their relationship, once just background, now became critical context for a jury to understand this wasn't a one-time fight, but the explosive end of a cycle. Faced with this mounting wall of evidence, the broken forensic story, the eyewitnesses to his rage, the digital footprints, Sims's defense options evaporated. A trial would involve the medical examiner displaying autopsy photos and coolly explaining the impossible angle of the bullet. It would involve those garage witnesses pointing at him from the stand. His own 911 call, analyzed by experts for signs of deception, would be played. The gamble of the staged suicide had failed spectacularly, and now the full truth was poised to be aired in open court on January 9, 2026. Sims chose the escape hatch. By pleading guilty to second-degree murder while armed, he accepted responsibility but avoided a trial. This plea deal is a transaction. The prosecution secures a guaranteed conviction and a long sentence, with sentencing scheduled for March 20, 2026, likely in the range of 15-30 years. Sims avoids the public spectacle of a trial and the remote chance of a life sentence without parole. But in this transaction, the full story is the currency that's spent. We will never hear a detailed confession. We will never know exactly what was said in those final, private moments. The why beyond the legal shorthand of an argument remains locked inside him. The legacy of Tyshida Williams is thus twofold. It is a life of promise brutally erased, a family left with agonizing silence where answers should be. And it is a stark, public case study in the lethal intersection of male entitlement, easy access to firearms, and the dangerous period when a relationship ends, but control is still demanded. The guilty plea provides legal justice, but it offers no catharsis. It answers the question, suicide or murder, definitively, but leaves the more profound question hanging in the air. In the moment he decided to stage her death as a suicide, was he trying to hide his crime from the police? Or was he trying to rewrite the final chapter of a story where she dared to write her own ending? The plea deal ensures Sims is punished, but it also seals the most intimate truths of the crime in a tomb of legal procedure. What dark details about their relationship? What final words were exchanged? What flicker of emotion crossed his face when he pulled the trigger? Are we as a society willing to forego in the name of judicial efficiency? Has the full story of Tyshida Williams been buried alongside? Please like the video and comment down your thoughts on this case, and don't forget to subscribe the channel and hit bell icon for notifications.